What's up guys, it's Bo here again, and it's been a while. I'm actually retaking this video. I've already recorded this video, but the quality of the video wasn't very good because, you know, after my hiatus, I had to kind of get back into the swing of things and I wasn't very used to doing these vlog entries, but I'm re-recording this one. This entry is about MBTI, which is short for Myers Briggs Type indicator, right? And more colloquially known as, you know, the online personality test with 4 letters in it, right? That, you know, is really popular in companies, you know, doing with the employees and just in school or whatever. You know, you probably come across it at some point. But I wanted to talk about this topic because it's one of those things that has stuck with me for all of the time that I've been doing what I've been doing, basically. You know, ever since I first learnt about it, which was, you know, 3-4 years ago, I've just kind of been continuously learning about it and applying it and seeing it have a massive effect on my life and other people's lives, right? So without further ado, I've already kind of, on my website, where I write a blog, I've already done a 2-part comprehensive kind of starter guide for MBTI. So I'll provide a link in the description below for you to check that out if you're interested in kind of reading up a bit more about this. But yeah, in this entry I wanted to kind of take that and break it down even further into kind of the core concepts of MBTI and its purpose. So what is it actually? What do we use it for? And how do we use it properly? You know, it's because this is one of the most kind of confusing areas, one of the most confusing things that you can come across on the internet. You know, how to type yourself, how to find out your personality, and you know, psychology in general is probably one of, if not the most misinformed fields out there, you know. So, you know, I just wanted to clarify once and for all what this, you know, this area of psychology actually, you know, what it actually means, how to actually interpret it properly. And I'm not going to go into too much needless detail in this entry, you know. I just want to, you know, hit the main points of what is it actually, what do we use it for, and how do we use it properly, right? So, just a bit of background. MBTI, Myers Briggs Type indicator, type theory, and as well socionics and other such kind of spin-off theories, is derived from Carl Jung's psychological types. His original theory, which kind of started all of these, you know, MBTI and all these kind of personality tests, coming from that. And at the center of Carl Jung's original theory are the 8 Jungian cognitive functions, right? The 8 Jungian cognitive functions, the 8 cognitive functions of MBTI, right? He recognized that within the human psyche, there are 2 different processes both for gaining information and also processing information, right? And these culminate into 4 core mental functions. Technically speaking, right, I know some of you might be watching this who might be more well-versed in this kind of area, Myers-Briggs. The terms mental functions and cognitive functions are used interchangeably. But I personally distinguish between, I use mental functions to mean the, you know, what I'm about to describe, which is, so there are 2 so-called rational functions, right? The functions by which we process the information that we receive, which are thinking, logic, and feeling, emotion, right? And then there are the 2 irrational functions, which are the functions by which we gain information, which are sensing and intuition, right? So I like to call these the mental functions, and then the 8 total functions that come from this, I like to call them the cognitive functions, but they are technically interchangeable, those two terms. They mean, technically speaking, you know, the full 8 cognitive functions. So how do we get to 8 cognitive functions from this? Well, he also recognized, Jung, that among these 4 key mental functions have also 2 orientations, which are extroversion, which is concerned with the outside world, and then there is introversion, which is concerned with the inside world, the inner world, or the self, right? And thus we reach the total of 8 cognitive functions. So the 4 functions, the two rational functions and 2 irrational functions, they have either extroverted focus or introverted focus, right? So we have a total of 8. And that is the basis of MBTI, right? That is the basis. That is the core kind of concept to Myers Briggs type indicator theory. You know, forget the whole kind of like, oh, like I'm 80% extroverted, I'm 20% introverted, or like I'm 35% judgment and the rest perception. Forget all of that. That stuff is inaccurate. It's more or less a bastardization of the theory. It doesn't really mean anything. So forget all of that shit, right? All you need to know is that there are 8 cognitive functions, and all that the 4 letters do is that they point to the preferential order that the cognitive functions exist within the psyche, right? That's all they point towards, right? The only so that the 4 letters are just a label. The only thing that matters in Myers-Briggs type indicator theory are the cognitive functions, right? That's the only thing that matters, right? So, you know, make note of that, because, you know, yeah, that's the only thing that matters. Forget everyone else who tells you otherwise. So, what are the 8 cognitive functions? Well, they are, I'll just list them through. Extroverted sensing, introverted sensing, extroverted intuition, introverted intuition, extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, and then extroverted feeling, introverted feeling, right? So the 4 mental functions but split into both extroverted and introverted functions, right? And then they have shorthands as well, which is basically the letter that points towards the mental function, and then E to mean extroverted or I to mean introverted. So you have SE, SI, NE, NI, TE, TI, and you have FE and FI, right? Those are the shorthands for those functions, right? And I'm just going to go into a bit of how these functions appear, like how they're ordered in the psyche. Basically, it's really interesting. The two functions within each pair, so the rational pair and the irrational pair, they are opposed, right? They form a dichotomy. So you have a dichotomy of logic, thinking, and emotion, feeling. So you have thinking and feeling on one dichotomy, and the irrational dichotomy is sensing and intuition, right? And in these dichotomies, you have the functions appear in opposite orientations, right? So to give you an example, let's say you have extroverted thinking as one of your preferred functions, right? Then the other function, the other judging function, the other rational function that you would have is introverted feeling, because you have extroverted thinking, you have the opposite orientation in the feeling, so you have introverted feeling, right? And also judging is another way of saying rational. So when like a judging function is a rational function, and a perceiving function is an irrational function, right? Yeah, so that's how our cognitive functions line up, right? And that is without exception, right? In terms of the way that our psyche prefers to order them. So I'm going to debunk a massive myth, which is that the functions that exist in your psyche, in your type, in your respective type, are the only functions that you have. That is bullshit, right? We have, each and every one of us has all 8 cognitive functions, right? They all exist within the human psyche. If they didn't, then we would not be able to function properly, right? So they all exist, and that is kind of that is like a gripe that I have with standard MBTI, is that it only accounts for 4 of the functions, whereas things like socionics, they account for all 8, right? But they all exist within our psyche. It is, yeah. So it's just that, you know, we all have preferences. We all have innate affinities towards certain cognitive functions. So, and these functions we use less. They take less energy to use. We're more comfortable using them, and we tend to use them more frequently. So we're more conscious of them, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and explain the kind of more complex part of it, which is the difference between extroversion and introversion, right? Before that, though, I'm just I've got a quick note here. Our cognitive functions, so MBTI is all about how we process our reality, how we perceive our reality, right? It doesn't really have anything to do, directly anyway, with how we think, our beliefs, our actions, our behaviors, you know, and things like that. You know, it doesn't really have anything directly to do with that. It is to do with how we perceive and process our reality. So it's not something that's readily obvious, right? You can't be 100% certain by observing someone, like how they act, how they behave, what they think, what they say. That, you know, that's like a complete telltale sign of, you know, there's psychological preferences in terms of cognitive functions, right? So, you know, we have to be careful, basically. Like, there are no kind of sweeping generalizations in MBTI. You can't say, oh, all people with this function of this type do this, or, you know, they think this. It's not like that. So you have to be careful when you're, and not to fall into that trap of pigeonholing people. But in this, so yeah, so extroversion and introversion, right? What does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't mean social, like being social and being a loner, you know. And in this case, it doesn't even necessarily mean, well, in this case, it doesn't mean even, like you get charged in a social environment versus you get charged by being alone. In this case, it means, it refers to the orientation of the cognitive function, right, that it's attached to, right? So everything else is like an oversimplification. In this case, it means the orientation of the cognitive function. And what do I mean by this, right? So, like I said, each of the 4 mental functions, sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling, are either orientated out, like, externally, so extroverted, or internally, introverted, right? So each of them is split into the 2. So, for example, you have extroverted sensing and you have introverted sensing, and those 2 functions are distinct from one another in the theory. So, an extroverted function is one that is orientated towards the outside world. So, an extroverted function seeks variety / breadth and an external consensus / standard, right? And conversely, an introverted function is orientated towards one's inner world, right? Oneself, which conversely seeks depth and personal significance, right? So that was just me explaining it. So an extroverted function, it wants variety, and it wants something that is objectively perceivable, right? That is there. And an introverted function is one that only cares about what is of personal significance, and it seeks depth, not variety. like an extroverted function would. So an extroverted function always wants new information. It doesn't treat any of that information as with any individual significance, right? So it doesn't see one thing that it perceives as more important than any other thing. It just wants new information. It only cares about what's happening in the moment, right? Contrasting with this, an introverted function is personal. It doesn't want new information necessarily. It doesn't really care what's happening in the moment unless it's something that's of personal significance, right? All it wants to do is to go deeper with like whatever is of personal significance. So whatever it cares about, it wants to go deeper with that, not broader. And so it's not so, yeah. So it wants to go deeper with what's already there. So the main issue, I'm hoping you can see, aside from differences in thinking, feeling, and sensing, intuition, because you meet people with preferences in that way. So this is kind of more standard Myers Briggs, where it's like, oh, I'm a thinker, he's more of a feeler. Oh, I'm a sensor, he's more of an intuitive, right? So aside from that, there is also people valuing different cognitive functions of opposite orientations. Right. So the extroverted function, it gets bored with the obsessive focus of the introverted function. Right. It gets bored of it. Whereas the introverted function is overwhelmed by the extroverted function's thirst for new knowledge. Right. So the extroverted function is like thinks that the introverted function is boring, and the introverted function thinks that the extroverted function is too chaotic. Like it's overwhelmed by it, right? And also the introverted function is out of place and out of sync with the extroverted function. Like I said before, the extroverted function is driven towards an external consensus. So it is aligned with whatever is happening in the environment, outside of there, in the outside world. So the introverted function is out of place because it's not contingent on that, right? So the introverted function thinks that the extroverted function is too unfocused and too scattered, right? It's too kind of shallow, basically. Whereas the extroverted function thinks that the introverted function is too slow and out of sync with what's going on in the moment, right? So I'm going to give some examples. So, for example, let's use sensing as an example. The extroverted sensor is basically concerned with what's happening right now, like physically. What is happening? What is kind of going on right now? Is there a fight? Is there someone kissing? Is there a kid on a bike? Is there a car coming out? Is something happening? Right? Something is happening. Right? So it's just like being at one with the present moment physically, versus the introverted sensor, who is concerned with how they feel physically, personally, right? So they're not so much concerned with what's going on right now. So the extroverted sensor will see the introverted sensor and think, we'll think this person is out of it because they're not responding to what's happening in the moment right now. So they'll appear kind of like really just in their own world, whereas the introverted sensor will think that the extroverted sensor is just too exhausting because it's like, oh my god, this is happening. Oh my god, that is happening. Oh my god, this is happening. Whereas the introverted sensor, they just want to enjoy themselves. They just want to sit with whatever they feel and just experience more of that, So that's sensing, and then feeling is another example. So extroverted feeling is concerned with what is the emotion that is kind of in the air at the moment, right? It is like, what should I be feeling right now? So it's kind of like, now I'm happy, now I'm sad. Like, oh, this person is sad, I'm sad also. And it's very kind of shallow in the sense that it's very kind of like bam, an emotion, bam, an emotion, bam, an emotion. Whereas an introverted feeler is someone who kind of sits with whatever emotion they're feeling right now, and they just want to experience that emotion and honor that emotion as fully as possible. So an extroverted feeler thinks that an introverted feeler is moody, basically, because and kind of not moody, stuck up, not a team player, because the introverted feeler is feeling their own emotion. They're not really concerned with what other people are thinking, how they should feel. They just feel what they feel, right? And the introverted feeler thinks that the extroverted feeler is insensitive, basically. Insensitive in the sense that it's like, I feel this way, so I don't really care what you feel. I don't appreciate you being so kind of overt with how you, they don't like the way that extrovert feelers glance over emotions, because extrovert feelers, they skip between emotions very quickly to whatever is kind of the prevalent emotion in the moment. Whereas the introvert feeler, it's like, okay, well, I don't feel that way, So they think that the extrovert feeler is too kind of insensitive to them, to their own feelings, and also, just too kind of dramatic, basically. So those were two examples. I could also give the other two examples, but I think this video would be too long of thinking intuition. I could actually, because I want to illustrate the point further. So, extroverted intuition is all about new ideas, new possibilities, new connections, right? And I am an INFP, so I have extroverted intuition as my auxiliary function, as my second function in my function stack. So basically, the way that I talk is probably very evident of this. I'm kind of moving from idea to idea very quickly. I'm like, oh my god, this idea, and then, oh, this connects with this connects with that. Oh my god, this idea, and then a random thought. That's extroverted intuition. Very broad, new ideas all the time, new possibilities, what's possible, keep developing, in that way. Versus an introverted intuitive who is more, they have their own ideas. They have their own ideas that are very personal to them. So they kind of have these ideas that they develop very finely, and it's very kind of chronological, right? So the extrovert intuitive looks at the introvert intuitive, and it's like the introvert intuitive takes too long with their ideas. Basically, sometimes kind of develops them to overkill. It's like the extrovert intuitive gets bored with the introvert intuitive's ideas, because it's the same idea, it's just being developed more. Whereas the introvert intuitive thinks that the extrovert intuitive is too unfocused, basically. It's like you're jumping from idea to idea and nothing's coming out of it, right? So so it's kind of the any user, the extrovert intuitive, is too scatterbrained, right? Whereas the NI user, the introvert intuitive, is too focused on their ideas, basically. Also, that NI users tend to be very opinionated, meaning that they tend to disagree more with people, because they don't like new ideas if they don't see them as valuable. If they're not part of the kind of ideascape that they've sculpted, and it's just random ideas like any users tend to chuck out, then they tend to disagree with them. It says no, that's not important, or I don't agree with that. Okay, and finally, thinking, right? Extroverted thinkers are very factual. I have extroverted thinking as my inferior function, my fourth function. So it's kind of like facts, saying just matter of fact, saying things. One fact, next fact. So lists, T users like lists. They like being kind of very brief in what they say, versus an introverted thinker who processes things logically more carefully, right? TI users are more careful with their logic. It's more kind of chronological for them. It's more kind of it's kind of more of an exact science, whereas T users tend to kind of hurl facts out willy-nilly. TI users tend to be more careful in their kind of analyses. So the extrovert thinker thinks that the TI user, the introverted thinker, is too experimental, too much looking to disrupt existing facts. Because TI users, they don't necessarily follow facts. The fact that something has been said and has been proven, supposedly, like, is not enough for them. Like, they need to kind of think it through, and it needs to make sense to them personally. Whereas the TI user, so the TI user thinks that the TE user is too kind of just pulling things out of their ass. It's like, oh, this is the TI user is just too much like, oh, this is true, oh, this. The TI user is kind of like, I don't care, or like, that's too, that has no significance to me, that kind of thing. Too argumentative in the sense that they'd like to chuck facts out. Like, TI users just like to chuck information out, like just endlessly, and the TI user has a more kind of systematic approach to how they construct arguments and how they view things. So that's all for functions and how they differ in terms of the orientation. So from all of this, we can understand that the two key problems within type theory and kind of this kind of psychology is firstly differences in the way that we like to perceive to process information, and what information draws our focus. So this is feeling and thinking and sensing and intuition. So it's differences in the way what kind of information and how we process that information, right? That's the first thing. That's the more obvious thing. The one that people tend to over-focus on. And the second one, which I hope has become clear to you once after I've explained everything, is differences in orientation of cognitive functions, right? So, the difference between an extroverted sensor versus an introverted sensor. So those are the two main problems, and those are the only two problems you need to concern yourself with, right? But from these two main problems, there are a plethora of implications, which I won't go into because there's just so many kind of examples of how different people with different perceiving or judging preferences can butt heads and also how people with differing orientations butt heads, basically. So that does simplify things a bit. Like I said, action and behavior is not a reliable indicator of cognitive function preferences. Particularly if you don't really know the person, or if you haven't, if you make assumptions based on the few times you've seen them in videos or the few times you've seen them out in social gatherings, and you don't have enough understanding of that person to kind of be able to tell the cognitive function preferences. It's very kind of, unless you know what you're doing, basically, it's very easy to make mistakes in typing people and identifying what cognitive functions they actually value. So just be careful on that one. Let's see. So when it comes to identifying cognitive function preferences, what cognitive functions does someone value? Then you need to look at the things that you need to identify are they a thinker or a feeler? This is standard stuff. Are they a thinker or a feeler, or are they a sensor or an intuitive? Then you need to ask yourself, out of those functions, is it extroverted or introverted? So, for example, the person is a sensor, like they are a lead sensor. Are they an extroverted sensor, or are they an introverted sensor, right? Or are they an extroverted thinker, or are they an introverted thinker, right? And one thing that makes it easier that I also explain on my website, on my post that I wrote about this, is if you have, so I also explained this earlier, if you have one function, if you spot one function and you're sure of that function, so you know it's extroverted intuition, then you know by the way that the functions appear in the psyche that the other function will be introverted sensing. It will be the opposite orientation, you know. So that makes things easier. So that's all you need to ask yourself. And again, I'm going to stress this, right? The only things that matter in MBTI are the cognitive functions, right? Those are the only things that matter. The letters, like I said, they're just a label that they don't matter. The only things that matter are the cognitive functions, right? So there you go. That's MBTI in a nutshell. Not as kind of brief as I thought it'd be, but you know, I thought that I would go into as much depth as I felt was necessary to illustrate to you once and for all how to do MBTI properly, right? Because there's just so much erroneous information out there. So many people saying things thinking that they know what they're talking about, but they don't. So, you know, I just wanted to make a video. Well, I wanted to make a video to clear all that up, but also I wanted to just go, you know, deeper. You know, I really like this theory, like I said, you know. I think it's really important. This theory really, it's at the forefront of everything that we do. Because ultimately, human perception is the means by which we traverse this existence and also, you know, create. So everything that exists, everything that we can, everything that we do, everything that we think, the first thing that we have to go through is how we perceive it, right? It's human perception, human consciousness. And MBTI is essentially the blueprint for that. So that is why this is so important. With this, you can understand, you know, just how we can perceive reality and, you know, how we ourselves versus other people, you know, So we learn, you know, we learn MBTI because we want to learn more about ourselves, we want to type ourselves, we want to type other people, but ultimately, and that, you know, that's fine if that's what gets you started, but really the deeper thing is with MBTI we want to use the MBTI to understand the full extent of human cognition, of human perception, right? We want to expand our understanding of our consciousness, of, you know, the human mind, basically. You know, you learn these functions not purely to type yourself and other people to more effectively deal with them, but you also want to do it because you recognize these things, right? Like I said, we all have the functions. So we kind of identify what we are in terms of types, but then we see, you know, the other functions, like how does this manifest in me? Like, if I'm not conscious of this, if I'm weak in this, how do I see this? You know, what does this mean? What does it mean? What is this function? What does it look like? What is it? You know, how does it appear in my behaviors, in my actions, in how I think, how it, you know, and then so you kind of get an understanding for all of the functions, and thus the full spectrum of human cognition, right? So hopefully, you know, this has been useful. I started to kind of ramble on a bit towards the end because, to be fair, like I said, this is my second time doing this entry. I'm kind of, you know, I haven't done these plug entries for a while, so I'm kind of still getting into it. And this is a very technical topic, so it's not my usual kind of like, oh, you know, just do what you love and all of that stuff. So hopefully I've done it justice, and hopefully, you know, I've given you some very useful information. So cool. This has been Bo. See you in the next entry. Peace.